Dr. Ann Nicholls, and I teach biology at the Well-Trained Mind Academy. I earned my PhD in biology from Cleveland State University and have focused my career on teaching. I've been teaching biology for 20 years and have taught both biology and environmental science at the middle school, high school, and college levels. I have been fascinated with biology since I was a child, and I am still obsessed with it. I love teaching biology because I get to share my love of and enthusiasm for biology with students. I love seeing them apply what we learn in class to their everyday lives. That's when I know they are starting to think like biologists. In my Biology for the Logic Stage class, students can expect to do a lot of independent but guided work outside of class. I call this work binder work because it is stored in their biology binders. For example, I provide guided notes for each chapter to help students take notes while reading their textbook. They make flashcards, either virtual or paper, and use the Lightner method, which is a more efficient means of studying by reviewing the cards you know less and less frequently. For the flashcards, I provide them with the terms to make the cards. There are also weekly labs they must complete and assigned sketches to draw from the textbook. I expect my students to read and take notes on the chapter before class, so they come to class with the background information that they need to benefit from my lecture. I often ask students questions during class to make sure they have done the reading, to allow them to relate what we are learning to real life, and to keep them engaged in the lecture. Students participate in class through polls, the chat, and raising their hand to use their mic when I call on them. Most weeks, the material I have to cover only takes the first class period of the week. In the second session, I finish up any lecture material that I didn't get to on the first day, and then we do an activity. Activities often include working on a review assignment, like tables, concept maps, and other visual ways to represent what we are learning about. We do this either as a whole class or in breakout groups. Playing review games, which is a favorite of most students. Learning more about a specific component of the week's topic and presenting the information in small groups or working in groups to present the information to the class. After attending class, students complete their remaining binder work to prepare for the weekly assessment, either a quiz or a unit test, due each Friday night. Students use the guided notes they took while reading as a study guide to help them prepare for the quiz each week. I give students 3 attempts on the quizzes because I want them to go back and to review what they missed on earlier attempts to reinforce the correct answer in their minds. My favorite part about teaching biology for the logic stage is the science fair, and most students enjoy it as well. Whenever I teach about science, I always stress that science is not a static set of facts, but a dynamic process where scientists learn more and more about the natural world. In my class, each student gets to take part in the scientific process as they design, carry out, and present an experiment to answer a research question of their own devising. I really enjoy working with students as they design and carry out their experiments, and I am always amazed at their awesome results and conclusions. Students enjoy doing their science fairs, and they love watching their classmates present, and I am always impressed with how supportive they are of each other. My sample lesson is about the classification of living things. This is the first chapter in Unit 2, which begins our survey of the diversity of life, my favorite part of biology to teach about. In the lesson, I stress the importance of scientific names in the study of biology and show students how to use a dichotomous key to help identify unknown species. Hello, my fellow biologists. Today we are talking about why and how we classify things. When you see an organism that you've never seen before, you probably put it into a group without even thinking about it. If it's green and leafy, you probably call it a plant. If it's long and slithers, you'd probably call it a snake. So how do you make these decisions? You look at the physical features of the new organism and think about what it has in common with other organisms that you've seen before. What would you classify this organism as, this organism in the center? Most students say insect, and some even say beetle. It is a type of beetle. So you may have never seen this beetle before, but it has characteristics of other insects you've seen. So you would probably conclude that it is an insect. So who can tell me what these other organisms are? What would you classify these other organisms as? So this one, students would say plant. This one, they would say mushroom or fungus. And so these two are the harder ones, more challenging. So usually I get 1 or 2 students who know these. This one is a sponge, and this one is a slime mold. Biologists use a classification system to group the millions of different organisms on Earth. Classification is putting things into groups based on characteristics the things share. In the picture, my son has used a simple characteristic, color, to classify his Matchbox and Hot Wheels cars. I believe classifying things is part of human nature. It helps us make sense of our world. It is especially important when you are trying to understand how living things on Earth are related to each other. Taxonomy is the science of describing, classifying, and naming organisms. Today, there are 8 main taxonomic ranks. They are domain, kingdom, phylum or division, class, order, family, genus, and species. At each level of classification, there are fewer organisms than in the level above. A domain is the largest level of classification. Every living thing is classified into one of 3 domains, and species is the smallest level of classification. So there are a few different ways to remember the order of these taxonomic groups. What I learned when I was in high school is dashing King Philip came over from Great Spain. I've also heard for green spaghetti, but my new favorite one that one of my students told me is dumb kings play chess on fat guards' stomachs. So sometimes when you're trying to think of ways to remember things, the more ridiculous it is, the better, because you're more likely to remember. In everyday language, we usually call organisms by common names. For example, cat, dog, and human are all common names. However, people who speak a language other than English have different names for cat and dog. But even when only considering the English language, there are problems with using common names when identifying living things. So what would you call this animal? So the students would eventually come up with woodchuck, groundhog, whistlepig, which is a new one to me, and land beaver. So this one species has 4 different common names. And so what about this species? It's not an African lion, it lives in America. So this is a mountain lion, cougar, puma, or a catamount. So as you can see, both of these species have 4 common names just in English. And this would be very confusing for scientists if they use the common name. One scientist could be talking about a mountain lion, and then another scientist who happens to call them cougars would not know what he was talking about. So that's one of the confusions of common names, is there can be multiple common names for the same organism. Another problem with common names is that one common name can apply to more than one organism. So what do you think of when you hear robin? So if you live in the United States and someone said robin, you would probably think of this bird. This is the American robin. But if you lived in Europe, you would probably think of this bird, the European robin. So these 2 birds are not closely related to each other, but they do have the same common name. And the reason for that is the American robin reminded European settlers of their European robin back home. So that's how it got its name. Because of these problems, scientists use scientific names to make sure they are all talking about the same organism and to avoid confusion. Scientific names are the same in all languages, so scientists around the world all refer to species by the same name. An organism has only one scientific name, and only one organism has a particular scientific name. Scientific names always have two parts. The first part of the name is the genus, and the second part is the specific name. The genus name is always included with the specific name to form the full species name. Sometimes the genus is abbreviated by its first letter. So for example, the scientific name of the Asian elephant that we see on this slide is Elephas maximus, and as a shorthand, you could also call the Asian elephant E. maximus. Scientific names are kind of like your name. Everyone has a first and a last name or family name. There are a number of people in your family who probably have the same last name as you, but everyone in your family has their own unique first name. So the genus is like your family name, and the specific name is like your first name. So does anyone know what is probably the most famous scientific name in the world? Pretty much everybody knows this, including my 6-year-old son. I think the reason why it's so well known by its scientific name is because it is extinct and we don't have to deal with it on a daily basis, thank goodness, so it doesn't really have a common name. Usually after a few more hints, students do guess that I am talking about the Tyrannosaurus rex. So Tyrannosaurus rex is actually the scientific name of that dinosaur, and it is sometimes abbreviated as T-Rex. What would you do if you found an organism that you did not recognize? You could use a special guide called a dichotomous key. A dichotomous key is a set of paired statements that give descriptions of organisms. These statements let you rule out certain species or groups based on the characteristics of your specimen. There are many dichotomous keys for the many different kinds of organisms. You could even make your own, which you will be doing as your lab assignment this week. In dichotomous keys, there are only two choices at each step. To use the key, you start with the first pair of statements. You choose the statement from the pair that best describes the organism. At each step, the key may identify the organism, or it may direct you to another pair of statements. By working through the statements in order, you can identify the organism. So we have here a dichotomous key about dinosaurs. So this is our dinosaur that we're trying to identify. So we start here at the first two statements. So the first statement is it walks on 4 legs and it walks on 2 legs. So I would walk the students through this dichotomous key using this dinosaur using a poll. So I would have a poll saying which statement is better describes the organism, the first or the second. And then the students would probably say the first because it has 4 legs. So if it's the first, you go down to step 2. And then we ask them these 2 questions and they do a poll again. After we identified this individual organism, we would do breakout groups where they would identify a couple of more of the dinosaurs using the same key.